Good evening. It is a pleasure to be here with you guys tonight. I have the task of talking about grief. Now, that is not the most upbeat topic, but it is something that impacts all of our lives, and we really can't avoid it. So we might as well know how to deal with it. So I'm going to open with a word of prayer, and then we're going to get started. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for using me. I pray that the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart will be acceptable to you. Use me to impart knowledge, impart wisdom, and hope in those who hear. In Jesus' name, amen. So, when I first think about talking about grief, I think about, people are going to be like, either I don't want to hear it or, I don't know, it's going to make me sad. But you know what? Grief is a part of life. And so tonight I want to do two things. You always hear about the stages of grief. We're going to talk about that, how they even originated. Then we're going to look at what grief is and what grief isn't. Next week we're going to talk about what do you do with it. So let's first understand it. Then what in the world do we do with it? So I'm big on definitions. I think we all need to have the same definitions if we're talking about something. So I want to define grief. And grief in and of itself is a normal and natural response to life. It is important to acknowledge and allow the grief to happen because it is part of the healing process. Grief can impact our body, our thoughts, and our emotions. We can't get away from it. And when we think about grief, a lot of times we think about grief in terms of death. But it's more than that. As that definition says, it's a normal and natural response to loss. You can grieve so many things. And after, I'm going to go through the stages first, and then I'm going to list some other things we can grieve and how they fit with the stages. So the initial stages of grief were first developed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in the 60s, but they weren't developed to talk about dying. About someone being dead already. She worked with terminal cancer patients, and in listening to them and watching them, she developed the stages that they go through as they're preparing to transition. It wasn't after the fact. Well, years later, they looked at it and they said, but these are things that the family would go through too, when they were watching someone in that transitioning phase. So we came up with, she developed these 5 stages. And since then, they've been updated. Some people say 12, some say 5. I'm going to use the list that says 7. And just kind of talk about what these stages are. And then we're going to look at how it can look if it's not a death you're grieving, but something else. So, and let me say, these stages are not in any order. You can go through it because everybody's different. You may experience all of them, some of them. You can go back and forth. You can get stuck in one and just can't move. So it's not I did step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm good. Because you might go through all 7 in one day. Especially in the beginning, because you're just like, okay, I'm good. Nah, no, you're not. Not if you do them all in one day. But you can actually experience that, but it doesn't mean you've gone through it and you can check them off. I have gone through the stages of grief and I can move on now. No. So the first stage we're going to talk about is shock and denial. The feelings of shock and denial are unavoidable. You're just like, I can't believe it happened. And you can experience that even if it's someone you know who has been ill for a long time. The moment it happens, you're still in shock. You can expect it. Personal story, my younger sister died of cancer in 2017. On a Thursday, she had the opportunity to speak in front of the Black Caucus in Washington, D.C., regarding talking to Black Congress people about getting their constituents to be part of clinical trials, because we don't want to do that. Understanding as a people our, mistrust for the medical field. We don't do that. That was on Thursday. Got the video. She was, they had to help her onto the stage, but she delivered an impassioned speech. Seemed like full of life. She died Monday after that. So I say it can be shock and denial. Even if you know the person's ill, when it happens, you still can be like, what? Huh? And people are like, well, you knew she was sick. It doesn't matter. So you can have that shock or that denial. It really didn't happen. I can't deal with it. And you will see people, they're like, and there are no words when you're in that phase. The next phase is pain and guilt. Once that shock kind of wears off, then it just hurts. If you've ever lost someone, it just hurts. And as I said earlier, this grief affects our body, our minds, our thoughts, our emotions. We feel it physically. When you're grieving, you can physically feel ill. You don't feel like yourself. And then the guilt is, if only maybe I shoulda, if I woulda, coulda, shoulda. Well, maybe it's nothing you coulda, woulda, or should have done. So that's where that guilt comes in. We keep thinking, what could I have done differently? Maybe I could have done more for them. Even if I couldn't save their life, I could have done more for them. Maybe not. Anger and bargaining. And these, as I said, these stages were developed when people were in the transitioning stage. They knew they were terminal, and then at that point you want to bargain with God. But after they're gone, it's still that anger. God, why did you take them? And then if it's a parent who lost a child, sometimes it's, why did you take my child and not me? I've lived my life, my child hasn't. Why did you take my spouse? Why? And we can become angry with God, and as Christians, we don't like to say that. But see, God knows our heart for real. And I like to say, go on and say you're angry with God. You know why? You can't deal with it until you admit it. God can't heal you from it until you say, God, I am mad. Why did you take them from me? That's part of that anger. The next stage is depression and loneliness and reflection. You can stay that angry stage and then you just get depressed. That's that kind of depression where your emotions are just all over the place. You feel an uncontrollable sadness about the loss of this person. It just is not good. And you're lonely because you miss them. No matter how many people are in your life, when you're missing that one person that's not there, there is a deep, deep loneliness, a sadness. And there can be some isolation because you don't want to go around people. Because so-and-so reminds me of them. And if I get in the car and I drive someplace, I'll have to drive by their street, and I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to stay home. I'm just going to reflect and think about it, but that reflection may not be a good thing. You can also develop anxiety because you're so worried. Let's say it was someone who was murdered. Maybe you're worried what's going to happen to you. And I'm originally from Houston, and right now in Houston, the murder rate is unreal. Unreal. I talk to people who are there, and they do actually think when you go, oh, we don't go out at night. Because, they're shooting. No, if somebody is at a red light and they don't move, you don't blow. Because you just wait. If you have to wait through 5 red lights, but then there's that sense of fear. And so if you've lost someone in that situation, you're really not going to move. You don't want to do anything. The next stage is there's an upward turn. It's like you hit that low, you hit that bottom out, and then there's nowhere else but up. But it's hard. But that upward turn is, I realize I've got to move on. I've got to live. And then you hit reconstruction. I got to put my life back together, whatever that is. And you realize you have to make a new normal. And we're going to talk about the COVID new normal and what it looks like and the loss we've had just because of COVID. But you make that new normal. And you can make it and might not like it. So let me find another one, because I still want my loved one back. And the last stage is acceptance and hope. It's when you learn to be grateful for what was, and what you had. But guess what? Remember I said these stages don't go in order. You could go through all 7 of them, and you can get that acceptance and hope, and guess what? You can wake up on another day back at depression, back at anger. So they're cyclic, and they don't go in any order, and just because you reach that point of hope doesn't mean that something might happen. If you've lost someone, have you ever been driving down the street and maybe you see a billboard and it reminds you of that person? Or you smell something and you just think of them. And sometimes it's a good thinking of them, and sometimes it just fills you with sadness. That is all normal. That, as I said, grief is physical. And we experience life through all of our senses. So it might be something you see, it might be something you taste, and it's like, oh, this tastes just like my mama used to cook it. I know what seasonings you put in here. I haven't heard anybody put that in there, and all of that. So then you have this rush of emotion because your senses wake it up. It might be the feel of something. It might be a certain fabric that they like to wear, and you feel something that's like, oh. So any of your senses can pop in and trigger a feeling. And as I said, sometimes it's a good feeling. It's made me think of them. Other times it's and then maybe you don't want to continue there. So I wanted to sort of start off with the stages so I could talk about some other kinds of loss in relationship to the stages. Some things we don't think of that we might grieve. When someone breaks up a relationship, if there's a divorce, you don't always think about grief associated with divorce. Now, let's say you were the one that didn't want the divorce. It wasn't the person who walked out on you. They left you. You lost that part of your life. And it may have been unexpected. You grieve that person. You grieve the relationship. So maybe it's not, and it could be that it was mutual, and you still could grieve the life you had with that person. So divorce could be one. What about loss of health? There are certain illnesses that we get, not just cancer, but certain things that can change our life. You get and it could be something simple. I say simple, but it's not. But let's say you suddenly become diabetic and you're determined you're going to eat right. And that's hard to do. But you're going to eat right, you're going to exercise, you're going to change your life. Easier said than done. And when you do, there may be times you're angry because you have to change your life. Maybe times you're depressed because you don't have the life you lived. And then you may accept it. I'm good with this diabetes and I'm moving on. And then someone says something because you get ready to eat a piece of cake. You really need that? And your anger can come right back. So you may grieve the life you had before that diagnosis. What about losing a job? I won't ask for a show of hands if anybody been let go before. But you could be let go or fired, just straight up fired. And, wow, that's not a good feeling. The grief and anger and depression can all kick in. It's because it represents several losses. It's not that you just lost a job. You lost your financial stability. Let's say you've been on this job for 10 years. You know what else you lost? The camaraderie, the friends, your coworkers usually. If you've been there for a minute, you tend to, have connections with people you work with. So now all the connections that were there, and you don't really want to go see these people now because I don't work there. Y'all know I got fired, so I really don't want to hang out with you all anymore, okay? So don't ask. You don't want to, you don't know what you're going to do financially if it was unexpected. So those same stages, anger, depression, grief, you'll accept it eventually, but that takes time. Something we don't think about that people grieve, and this is a hard one for people to even wrap their heads around, and that's when someone has a miscarriage. You know what we typically do when somebody has a miscarriage? Nothing, because we don't know what to say. We don't understand, well, the child really wasn't here, so I guess you're okay. You're not too sad. Really? No, not at all. That was a living, breathing being that was a part of you, and it's gone. You grieve that child that's not here, even though they were an unborn child, and that one is very just difficult. People don't understand that, don't know what to say, but understand that that's something else you grieve. Here's one, retirement. It's like, let me retire. I'm going to feel real good. But for some people, they weren't ready for it. Me, when I do finally retire, I'm going to enjoy it. I am not going to be the one, Some people embrace retirement, they run into it, and they're more busy in retirement than they were when they were working 9 to 5 for somebody else. Now you get to enjoy your life. You live for it. And if you have a good, strong connection, family and friends, your church, things that keep you busy, you're going to enjoy it. But what if you were that person who doesn't have a lot of connections? And some people are so busy pouring themselves into their job that they have neglected family and friends until they retire. Then I'm going to do it then. Well, you haven't made any connections. And so that life you had is gone. What do you do with that? I need a reason to get up in the morning. I need a reason to sleep late, but that's okay. But, there are those people who, it's real. And I've got a few more just because I want you to begin to think about grief differently, that it's not just death. Now, if you're not a dog or cat lover, this one will not make sense to you, but loss of a pet. If you are an animal lover, that animal is part of your life. You wake up to walk that dog. And sometimes the dog sleeps at the foot of your bed. And so think about it. If that dog had always been at the foot of your bed and it's gone, are you going to sleep the same? It's going to take a minute. Can you still be angry at God for taking that dog? Yeah. Because what if you lived alone and it was just you and that pet? Now you're just alone? Really? So we don't think, I'm not a real dog person, but I get it because I have friends who are. And at first I was like, okay, what? And yeah, But when I began to think about it and study grief more, I get it. It's a loss of something that was near and dear to you. What if you lost a cherished dream? That's not even tangible. You can't touch it. But what if you always wanted to do something and it was gone? It's like, it's not happening now. It's not happening. You can have those same steps we talked about because something that you wanted is no longer available to you. But again, no words. We can begin to experience these same stages if someone else is going through an illness. Like I said, that's how she developed these, when people were going through it. And you can have the same response if it's someone you know and love and you're watching them die and you care for them day after day. There are days you're angry. There are days you're angry you have to care for them, and people don't want to talk about that. Because if you say you're angry about caring for your loved one, what does that say about you? You must be a horrible person. No, you're human. And it's part of the process of grieving, is that I don't want to do it anymore. I'm tired. I don't want to have to get up. I don't want to watch you die. Or the depression because I am watching you die, and I know no matter what I do, I can't really make you comfortable. And no matter what I do, I can't prolong your life. And then the bargaining. God, if you just Do this. I'll do right if you just take care of them. Take me. Don't take them. All those bargaining that we talked about earlier comes into being because you don't want to see them transition. What about loss of a friendship? We talked about marriage, but what about just your friendship? Do you ever lose a good friend over a disagreement? You can, if it was somebody close to you, and they're alive, and you still don't have them in your life, that's still a loss. That's still something we grieve. Loss of safety after trauma. If you have had anything traumatic happen in your life, it can cause a loss. It can cause changes how you just do things. And it can be little things. It may not even hit the grief level, but little things can change your life. Example, I always try to get personal examples that are crazy. Years ago, my son was in elementary school, and he wanted some milk for his cereal for breakfast the next morning, so we get up and go to the local Walgreens, because I did not want to go to the grocery store, because it was Walgreens in and out. Milk was right here. It's quicker to get in and out than going to the grocery store. So we go to the grocery store. We're standing in line. Someone walks in black head to toe, face, everything covered. This is pre-COVID, so there was no mask. So you get an idea of what's going on. So, of course, I freeze. I was standing here. My son was standing by the register where the person with the gun was. So, you kind of had a little panic moment. Okay, full disclosure, it took me over a year to go back to that store. I just couldn't go in. In the daytime, y'all, I couldn't go in. And so sometimes things take us aback, and it might not reach the grief stage, but I shared that to say anytime there's something that can be traumatic in your life, it can impact you until you realize it. And what made me go in was, I am not going to, live in fear. Now, I can't say I ever went back at night, because it was too dark, and that was why it was easy for them to do it. And they haven't lit the parking lot yet. And it took a while to go to any Walgreens at night. So those kind of things, and that's how it can be if you lose someone in a traumatic way, if they were shot, if they were stabbed, if they died in a car accident, anything like that, you may not want to go back by the location of where they died. If anything happened, you just want to do it. Because that was just a simple example, but if someone died, you don't want to go back. I had a client once who didn't want to drive down, how streets intersect. So this is the main thoroughfare, and this client didn't want to go down the main thoroughfare because it would cross over the street where their loved one lived. And that actually is a normal response. It's just like, they ain't doing it. Not today. And you don't have to. Here's one that we don't think about: selling a family home. When you get ready to sell the family home, meaning all of your memories, the house you grew up in, when you sell it, those memories may be here, but you can't go in anymore. Yeah. When that grief can be associated with, usually you're selling it because maybe it was a parent's home and they're gone, they're not with us anymore, and so it brings back the sadness that they're not there. It brings back all those emotions. So that's just a short list, but there are so many things we can grieve. If it is a loss. I do want to mention this one, COVID. And let's talk about the losses with COVID. The obvious ones are people who passed away with COVID, and we're going to miss them. But guess what? COVID changed our lives. And it may never be the same. The fact that you're sitting in this room with a mask on, that's a change. The fact that when we can't get a lot of people in here, we're going to mark off some rows. You're going to sit here. You better sit with your family. Don't go sit with a stranger. Even how we welcome people into church is different. Some churches have a sign-in. You have to sign up before you come, or just different protocols. But you can't, we think of church as the open door and everyone can just come in. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. Really? We have reached our number today. You better come get saved next week, because we can't put anybody here. This is a magic number, and we've reached it. So COVID has changed our lives, and there is a grieving of the life we had. Do you ever sometimes wish COVID never happened? And you could go back to just living the way you lived before? You could go to a restaurant and not think about it. You wouldn't have to wear a stupid mask on your face to go anywhere. You could be in crowds of people if you liked and be comfortable with it. We can grieve that loss. And there's those stages. I can be angry that this has happened. Can we just, Or it can be depressing. For people who had to work at home and they've been in an office forever, you can grieve the lifestyle you had at work. In talking to people, one of the things I find people talking about is that, but I miss just going to see, my coworker in the next office, the next cubicle. I had somebody to talk to. You knew each other, some in work environments, you knew so-and-so's children, you knew about them. Oh, so-and-so is selling cookies. Let me go, and all you do is exchange the same money. Because your child is buying cookies, I got to buy it from you. Your child is buying, selling candy, I got to get it. My child's selling candles, so we just really changing the same money around. But you know what? That was part of your lifestyle. In the COVID world, it's not there. Just seeing that person, seeing other people. So people who had to suddenly work at home, it was hard. Because they missed, first they thought, oh, this is great. I don't have to get dressed. I don't have to do this. I like to work at home myself. I'm loving it, but I don't have to get dressed. Not for real. I have to do this. But you don't get to be with people. And we can grieve relationships. Like we were talking about, people a friendship that breaks up. You grieve, and that person's still there. So you can grieve the lifestyle you had with your job. You still have the job, but it's not the same. And for millennials and younger, their whole life is played out on social media. And their sense of what they lose is very different. And when we talk to them, sometimes you're like, we might not get it if you're not in that. But they can grieve and miss and lose things we don't even understand. So grief is bigger than any of us. But just going through it, just to explain, it's not just death. That list and more. What other things could we possibly grieve? I'm used to question and answer. So anybody have anything else you think about just before I talk about what grief is and what grief isn't? Anything you might think we could grieve? Other than my list, because it's not complete. Anybody? Okay. I'll come back to that. I wanted to talk about some true and false things about grief. So to get a little participation, you'll give me a thumbs up if you think it's true, thumbs down if you think it's false, okay? The first one. Everyone experiences grief in the same way. What a smart audience, yes. Everybody experiences grief differently. And guess what? You personally can experience grief differently with different people, depending on the place and space they have in your life. It might not be that, when so-and-so died, I felt this way. Well, then when somebody else died, I felt differently. Well, they may have held a different place in your life, and you're at a different place. 5 years ago, when that other person died, this is how you felt, because that's where your life was 5 years ago. 5 years down the road, you're a whole different person. Just life happens. So not only does everybody grieve differently, you can grieve differently with different people, and it's okay. And then sometimes we get upset. Well, why am I should hurt more. Should you? Maybe not. It's where you are. And you might later on, remember I said about those states, they're cyclic. You good. And all of a sudden, bam, it slaps you in the face. So be gentle with yourself. There'll be a time when you need them and they're not there. True or false? There will be a time when you need them and they're not there. Yeah. And here's the thing. Do you think it's time limited? Can it be 10 years out? It can. It can be 10, 15, 20 years, and you want your mama. You're going through something and you think, if she was just here, if Daddy could just look at you and say, it's going to be all right. So yeah, there'll be a time when, wow. Does that mean you haven't accepted it? No, it means you love them. One thing about grief, one statement about grief is, it says, grief is the price you pay for loving someone. Because if you didn't love them, you wouldn't grieve them. So one way to help work through grief is to hold on to the love you had for that person and the love they had for you. Because you ain't grieving nobody who didn't love you back. So you think about that mutual love you had, and you hold on it. Grief is a form of love, and it needs to find a place in your life after you lose that someone. So you hold on to that moment and that feeling of love. I loved them. They were in my life, and if you didn't love them, you wouldn't grieve them. You just move on. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Grief follows orderly and predictable stages. All right, we're listening. There's nothing predictable about them. And like I said, you may wake up and go through all 7 stages in one day. It's just what's going on in your life because you're thinking about them. It's close, especially when it's close to the time of them, close to the time when they pass. You're like, oh. So yeah, it's nothing predictable. And like I said, there are stages, but they're not in any order. Here's another one. The goal of grief is to get over it. All right. It's not. I see some people thinking about that one. Yeah, and I will tell you how I feel about get over it. To me, when you say get over it, it's like it's nothing. Yeah, it's just whatever. It's done. You just push it aside. They gone. Move on. Rather than get over it, I see it as learning to accept it if we look at it in the stage point of view. And as we said earlier, finding that new normal, figuring out what life is without that person there. But you don't get over it. You don't just, oh, I'm good. I'm over it. Wow. If grief is the price you pay for loving someone, do you get over loving someone? So you don't just get over it. Here's one. Time heals all wounds. I got one no. Okay, and you're right. Time can help you manage your grief, but it's not necessarily going to heal the wound. And in some ways, the wound doesn't heal. There are parts of the wound that never go. That's why I said earlier, you can, 20 years from now, from the time a person passes, you may think about them and may want them in your life. So that feeling is always a little something there. Let me see. We should move through our grief as quickly as possible and get on with our life. Yeah, it's not quick. It is, and next week we'll talk a little about, how long is too long when you get over it. But there are what times you get stuck and you do need help. But, as quick as possible, is that even honoring their memory? So it's like, I need to stay in this place a little longer. This is a tricky one. Nothing will fill the void. True or false? I got a yes and I got a no. Guess what? I'm going with the yes. And let me tell you why. The void that that person leaves when they're gone, other things can happen, but that person will always be gone from your life. And so that space they have in your heart, that hole you have in your heart, it will be there. The hole doesn't have to hurt anymore. The hole can heal, but nothing is going to take that particular person's space in your life. Does it mean you will always grieve them, always be sad? No. It just means they will always have a place in your heart. And so other things can happen and you're not even aware of it until, like I say, you drive by, there's that billboard, you'd have that one smell or that taste. And you remember because that space is still there. So there will always be a space for them. You don't get over it. Because if you get over it, then they don't have a space in place. But there is always a place and space. Another statement. Moving forward with your life means forgetting your loss. When you move forward, it means you forget it. Right. Does not. Moving forward, we talked about those stages, means I'm accepting it and I'm looking for hope. And I'm moving forward, I'm figuring out my new normal. And guess what? You figure it out today, you may have to figure out another one tomorrow. Because it's not working again. I don't like this new normal. Okay, just like our COVID normal, we might not like where we are, so I've got to find another one. And so it is with grief. How do I find another normal? So, yeah, I don't know. It's wrong to feel certain emotions after a loss. You feel how you feel. And nobody can tell you it's wrong. That's your feeling. They don't know whoever it was you lost, whatever you feel you. You feel your life, not nobody. And it could be you could have 10 siblings and one pass away. How you feel and the relationship you had with that sibling is different from the rest of them. And so you may grieve differently than your siblings. It could be your parents. And you may grieve differently from your siblings. Because everybody does what? Everybody grieves differently. And so because you do, you got to do it however you got to do it. And there's not a wrong way. If some people need to cry and scream, that's okay. If someone else needs to just be silent and they cannot cry, we don't want them to stay there forever. But yeah, it is in that moment what emotion works for you. And we all handle our emotions differently anyway. Some people are naturally more emotional than others. Some are pretty just stoic. Yeah, I'm really sad. Really? And they really could be. You're like, well, you not crying. You just look, I am devastated. And they could say it just like that. And you're like, okay. But that is who they are. And that is how they manage life. I'm more on the, I'm devastated, stay in, you know. That is who I am. My sister is more on the more emotional end. Are either of us wrong in the way we feel it? Mm-mm. It's how God created us. And we can't, if you think of it, if everybody had the same emotional response to things as you do, how would the world be? All right, yeah. If everybody responded the same way you did, we need some variety in emotions. You need the person who can fall out and cry, and you need the person to say, okay, but right now, this is what has to be done, and they get the job done. You need it all. So we need a range of emotions to manage life. Everybody can't be the same. A few more. No one can tell you how to grieve. True. Which goes with the others. And no one can actually tell you what stage of grief you're in. I can't look at you and really tell. You know, we talked about the stages earlier. I can't look and tell and say, you're just stuck in anger. I don't really know. Because you may be acting out in anger and you're really depressed, because depressed people sometimes manifest it in anger. So I could think, you're just angry. You need to work through that anger and get through this grief stuff. Well, that might not be where you are. So we can not only can we not tell a person how to grieve, we can't tell how they're grieving. You know how you find out? Ask. Be able to be there and ask them, what's really going on? I'm here to help you. Let me see. The pain will go away faster if you ignore it. Everybody's like, come on now. But these myths, these true and false statements, are things people actually think, which is why I wanted to, share. I cut down the list, but why I wanted to talk about that. Because some people do think, okay, you know what? I'm just not going to think about it. And here's what happens. It's like if you some people talk about sweeping something under a rug. So let's say you have a throw rug in your den, and you sweep something under it today. And tomorrow you sweep something under it. And every day for a month you sweep something under. What happens to that rug? You got a big pile. Can you walk over it normally? No. So did we make the problem go away, or did we create a new problem? So when you ignore your pain, you create a new problem. You know why? When you do it, and next week we're going to talk about the physical things that happen in your body, you can make yourself physically ill by sweeping it under the rug, ignoring it. Because you keep sweeping stuff under the rug enough, you're going to trip on it. Because now you got a big hump. What am I going to do with this? Oh, I need to get it from under the rug. No, it's going to stay there because I don't want to deal with it. So now I have a new problem. I didn't resolve the first one, and now we've got more going on. So now you can't ignore it. Let me see. This last one. Grief is reserved for the passing of a loved one. Nope, we talked about that. It could be a job. It could be a friendship. It could be a lifestyle. It could be life after COVID, which changed your lifestyle. It could be, and thinking in a church context, you can grieve church the way it used to be. Do you ever stop and think about how church was in 2019, 2018? You ever want it back? You ever want to hug somebody without, you okay with a hug? I'm not, okay. That elbow a little too close. Shaking hands? Will we ever go back to shaking hands? Will we just hug like we used to? My prayer ministry at church, in December, we got together to do a potluck, and we hadn't been together, since COVID, and it'd been so long. And all you want to do is hug everybody, because we're a very huggy, loving group of prayer warriors. So I need to hug everybody. But we're in this COVID world. So and when you hug, you don't hug like you used to. That deep hug that you just felt all in your bones. It was such a good hug. You don't hug like that anymore now. If I hug, it's like, hey. Does that feel the same as, These are, when you talk about missing and grieving the loss of something, and you can be angry about it. Well, the bargaining, okay, we just gonna hug a little bit, because I just gotta have a hug. And if we do that, and you think of all this through your mind, or, now, God, I know you got a purpose for everything, but why in the world did you send us COVID? People can feel that way. And be angry. Really, God? Could you made something a little more simple? So these are some of the things that people can grieve, some of the things that people are missing. I was looking at my notes, some other things. So before I move on, any questions? Comments, questions? Yes.
About church, one of the things that you probably don't give enough space to is been there for a significant amount of time. We don't always know how to help churches navigate the grief that comes from having lost a pastor. Well, the pastor passed away, left, moved somewhere else, and ran off, whatever happened. We don't always know how to navigate that grief. We have a pastor who's here for 10 years, 20 years, 30, 40 years. They're now not here. We had the funeral service, we had whatever we had. We're looking for a new pastor, but church is still grieving.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to learn how to navigate that and help the church body, not just individuals, but the church itself, actually work through that grief process. Because what happens is when the new person comes, they're confronted with the grief, which may include the anger, the bargaining, the depression, whatever else comes with that the congregation still has, and they have to work through.
Mm-hmm.
Or a new pastor would probably try to work through that with the congregation at least for the first 2 or 3 months, just to help them kind of transition.
And then they may not even be aware. The pastor may not even be aware that, oh, y'all are grieving. And even if the person just retired, the pastor could simply retire, but if he's been there 30 years and you've been there all 30 with them, you are grieving the loss, because with a new person comes new things. And you know, people don't really like change. So you changing my church? Really? So yes, thank you. That's a good one. And that brings up the idea of joint grief. So it's a church body, and remember, everybody grieves differently, right? So let's say it's a congregation of 500 people. And out of that 500, 300 of them are really struggling because the pastor died. But they all do it differently. And now you're the new pastor to come in? Wow. And no one wants to talk about it. So in the best case scenario, you deal with it. You don't sweep it under the rug, because not talking about it is sweeping it under the rug. And we saw you do is get a big hump in the rug to trip over, and it's still there. So we have to learn to be more open in situations like that and manage group grief, and then be able to understand that the way you feel it, the way I feel it, the way you feel it, you is all different. So out of everybody in this room, we can have that same shared experience and feel differently about it. Or be at different stages, going back to that. Somebody may, I'm just depressed because pastor not here. This new guy is good, but I don't want to hear him. I'm just angry because I don't even want him anyway. Lord, why did you take them away? You know, you can, and all of these feelings can be going on, and it's a shared grief, but we're at different spaces, different stages, and the stage you in this Sunday, I might be in that stage next Sunday, and you may be in another one. So, but it's shared. We need to talk about it. So the thing with grief and emotions, period, we need to learn to talk about them. Is that a hand? Yes.
Visit with a LPC.
Yes, it does. I'm an LPC and I take insurance. So yes, it most definitely does. And grief is an issue that you can go and talk to a therapist, because there are some times when the grief gets too much. And it doesn't mean anything's wrong with you if the grief is too much. It means you're human and you're normal. Even, excuse me, even as a trained therapist, you might have to talk to somebody to manage your grief. You can know everything up here, but your heart still hurts. And which is where I was going. Any other questions? So here's the thing I want to say about grief and mental health in general. It is my belief that health is health. So we talk about mental health and we talk about health as if there's something separate. It's all health. Grief impacts our health. It impacts us emotionally, It impacts us physically. It impacts our health. When we begin to understand that our mental health is just part of our health, we're better off for it. And that grief falls into that category. In the African American community, too many of us have diabetes, high cholesterol, and what's the other one? High blood pressure? Yeah, high blood pressure. And we'll go take a pill for that. You're going to do it. Okay, I got to take a pill, got to go take my blood pressure pill. And you'll take that. And you go to the doctor for that. But if you're feeling depressed, if your grief has overtaken you and you are stuck, well, something's wrong with you if that happens. No, it is all part of your health. So we should take care of our mental health the same way we take care of our physical health. It's just our health. So if grief is overtaking you, you don't have to manage it alone. If grief is overtaking you, it's part of your health. It's impacting your emotional well-being, and it can impact your physical well-being, and it can impact your spiritual well-being. Let me tell you how. We think about mind, body, and spirit being separate. Really? Let's think about that. Let's just use depressed. If you are depressed, and we'll say that's just mine, that's my emotions, let me tell you how it can impact your physical health. If you're depressed, after a while, you know what? You're not going to take care of yourself the right way. You're not going to eat. If depression gets too bad, I'll eat tomorrow. Worst case scenario, you won't bathe. Had a depressed client, didn't shower for a week, and she finally showered because she offended herself. Seriously. But I was too depressed to get out of bed. I didn't want to eat. So when you don't shower, bathe, eat, that can make you physically ill. So you impact one. Okay, let's go the other way. Let's say you have a physical illness. Oh, I forgot spiritually. You stayed depressed too long. You don't think that's going to impact your spiritual life? It will. Because then you're mad at God. You don't want to pray, because if you're too depressed to eat, too depressed to bathe, you get too depressed to pray. So one impacts the other. We cannot separate them. So let's say it's a physical illness. Go on that end. You have a physical illness, and it stays, and it won't go away. You don't think it's going to impact your mental health? You don't think you might be the one to get mad at God and say, God gave this to you? So we cannot impact one without impacting the other. So mind, body, and spirit, that's who we are. That's who God created us to be. And we've got to take care of all of them. Grief can impact mind, body, and your soul, your spirit. Because grief can be when you're at the point where you're angry with God and you get stuck there, it's impacting that. When you get to the fact with your grief won't let you move, I can't move, and you really physically feel as you can't move. When grief gets to the part where you're just stuck. So next week we're going to talk about, so now what? What do I do with this? What are some things? I want to talk about the physical aspect. Some of the things that grief does physically to your body, so you can be aware of it and share with others. And then ways to help yourself and others manage their grief. Any other questions? Because that's all I have for you tonight. I think I'm giving you 3 minutes back. Anything else? Any other questions or comments? All right then. Well, thank you. I enjoyed being here.